everybody. So I was like, I'm like dwindling down on like my budget, being that I'm really not that great at being on a budget. But so this week for for the Pine Confessionals, I wanted to talk about something that I didn't see that much. And I use the word dwindling in the sense that in the Bible it talks about faltering. And so when you look up the word faltering, it just talks about like a strength, and then it just dwindling. And then you kind of becoming like weak over time. And so for this week, I wanted to talk about infinite limits. And so, for example, when I was homeless, the first time around, and then the second time around when I was in Arizona, then my third time around, I noticed that there was like a pattern that I mentioned that like having been a what is it called, a mentor and having worked with children, we often say things about the children in the community, like they vote with their feet, or it's not what you say, it's what you're not saying. And so a lot of the times I naturally, and it's called occupational psychology. And so what happens is, like, let's say somebody is a construction worker, and I have to go fast because I'm on like hotspot Wi-Fi. It's a part of my like bus bench or my budget bums is like I'm on hotspot. Being that, like, if you're out of money, like there's no excuses, you still can find like a way. So if you have like a hotspot, it's because you get it from your Obama phone. And everything that I've ever done on this wasn't from like a computer or an office. It was all literally things that was either inside me or instilled inside of me that I did on my Obama phone. And so you really could do, like, for an example, as an example of infinite limits, is that you can reach, to some of the highest limits with very little information, and so very little resources. And so going back to like having research society, I come home and looking at the time that I was here. I grew up in 1985. When I grew up in 1985, I heard in the Selena movie, and I heard that there's new music for Selena coming out, that the Selena family, before Selena became big, the family was running a restaurant. And they're looking at all the bills and stuff, and they're like, orale, Reaganomics, And so you come to find out, like, that during that time, Ronald Reagan, who was inside, like, in the office at the time, it on the outside seemed, with the 80s, like the, like that Breakfast Club, and, my favorite movie, The Monster Squad, that politics at the time was a lot more difficult, and so politics got a lot more lenient in the 90s, where I'm sensing a lot of like feedback at the moment. Politics have gotten a lot more lenient, and so then when I graduated high school, I ended up graduating in 2003, and in 1999 I was freshman and sophomore, so around like 2003, 2004 is when the new president came in, and I just graduated, and that was Bush. And so it's funny because, like, before that, all that happened, while Bush was in office, my brother had like this really bad scandal about for using drugs inside the NFL. And his biggest scandal was not that he did drugs, it was that there was a death involved with the drugs. And so my brother, I remember I was like surfing the web, looking at porn or something, and I had like Googled his name, and we had two things that most families never had. We had web TV, and we also had a Lincoln Navigator. And these were like two things that the Lincoln Navigator, before it even came out, we had the Lincoln Navigator that ever existed in all of the country. And we also had web TV. Basically what it was that we, as a remote control, we had a keypad, and so while we were watching TV we could go on the internet web, and I used to watch a lot of porn at that time. And so one time I was scrolling the web, and they're talking about my brother, and they're like, he's the George Bush of the NFL. Like, nobody liked him there, and then nobody liked him there. Come to find out, he did some. He made it through, and he came out on the other side like a quiet victory. So I'm kind of happy. I'm kind of happy about that. He did a good job in ducking his head and just dipping out, and that was just something aside from what he had been through. And so that's not the infinite limits I'm speaking to. I think a lot of times with Apple phones, you can have Apple 1 and then Apple 16, or you can have RuPaul's Drag Race 1 and then you have RuPaul's Drag Race 20 and stuff like that, and all of it is just the same. It's your grand prize is $100,000, or a Super Bowl ring or whatever. Anyways, I digress. Having coming home, I look at the community, and as a homeless individual, it's there's not much to aspire to. Even looking at the cars around here, so you look at everybody driving by, and it's just everybody has a great car, but the community sucks as a whole. Nobody really is striving to for that infinite limits type of mentality. And I think everybody says the words. Everybody says the words infinite limit, but nobody really knows how to achieve that. And everybody also, everybody at some point they're just oh yeah, it's this or it's that. And so it's funny because in the Mean Girls movie, Aaron Samuels is oh God, he had his hair was so beautiful, blah blah blah. She's wait, pay attention. What did I forget about infinite limits? And she's well, if the limit never approaches anything, then the limit doesn't exist. And so I laugh because it's such a stupid thing, because that's not really the reality. It's we're all gonna approach something. And even when we think we're striving for limits, that mathematical probability or formula is highly incorrect. And so a lot of times people think that, it's I've got the formula figured out about how to find infinite limits, but you can just be going around and around in circles and not even know it, and you can be at a certain level and not even know it. And so to someone that's technically you qualify for an infinite limit. And so it's the stupidity of that is that, it's oh, that's all I need to know. But for me personally, it means something different. I think it's fair to say that infinite limits mean something different to everybody. But that at the end of the day, there's something inside of you that says I'm not happy, or I'm not reaching, or I'm not, and I'm doing all that I can, but I don't know how to do this or that. And so, anyways, so I digress. So in around 2003, I graduated high school, and I started to notice that the community starts to soar a little bit. What I noticed is that first I identified that there was a need and that there was a problem, and then that there is an opportunity within that need and that problem. And then because of that need being so vast and that problem being so vast, it expands, and then you see the growth of the community, but then you see it dwindle. And when you see it dwindle and you see it falter, then you realize that they're not meeting their infinite limit, or that they've reached some type of scaffold or caveat or hindrance that pushes back. And so it's not a reminder to be, infinite limits. Is that, there's this saying that we, or I am, or we are a connection to the all that creates the universe. And so sometimes we most people in the spiritual world, we say we're physical or spiritual beings having a physical beings having a spiritual experience, or spiritual beings having a physical experience, and therein lies that understanding of infinite limits. And when you understand that infinite limits and something within yourself has this mindset of within your own self that I'm incomplete, then you come to a halt, that you met your limit. And when you don't know the answer immediately within the limits, then something within you has been drifted, or that doesn't know it isn't aware of your allness of infinity. Most times people, like for example, I have books here, and these Vikings guys, they started circa 300 right after the Crusades, and they barely only lasted till like 1,100. But we all know that my uncle coaches for the team. And then, these 12 steps, they started early in the 1900s, and their juice is to like not change shit, but people kind of keep going back and forth, relapsing in their own sobriety. And then you have the beauty of something that is an element and an ingredient of infinite limits, and it's called paradoxes. And the paradox is something that you're like, that's not supposed to work. That's not supposed to be. That's not the way it's supposed to be. But it works, and it gets you to where you're supposed to be. And so that's funny, because having grown up between that time frame of 1985 and then graduating around 2003, for me personally, being homosexual in the earliest of like the 1990s, I was like brutally bullied for a long time. But not only was I brutally bullied, I didn't have any figment of who to be other than Robin Williams. Not only did I have Robin Williams, I only had something cultural to refer to. Sorry, my teeth are chattering. And so, even at that, something inside myself said, "This is a paradox. This ain't right. This is a limit that isn't right." And so, around 2010, 2003, what happened is 2003, they removed the Sodomy Act, and so they still have a Sodomy Act, because once they put an act in place, it still is still existent in the American system. But what they don't do is they don't remove it. You just have to revise it. And so in 2003, you can finally like fuck up the butthole, you can finally get taken up the ass. And then in 2010, you can get married. And then in recently they'll kind of go back and forth and stuff. And so it's not necessarily about the being gay or being happy and stuff. The infinite limit is really knowing and being able to just not just say, hey, I really want this one thing, or I really need this one thing, so that way I can, get that chip off my shoulder. There's something that says, I don't need that, and I don't need that, and I don't ever want that either. And there's something that says that within myself, I'm either settling or I'm holding myself back. But it's always something that was within myself, and I always knew that when I was a kid, which was like the beautiful thing, because getting into arguments with my siblings, I always seemed to win. And not because I was the youngest or because I was like beautiful, it's because inside me I knew that they were just impressing something on me, saying that, hey, this is how it should be. You should do this or you should do that. And so even at like being homeless, it's funny when you have a connection with the universe that is in all infinity, and you are at your lowest and you are nothing to the rest of the world, but then everything just starts to pave and a way makes for it. So for example, I'll cut this short because I'm worried about data, but I'll chat a lot longer. But when I left here with some like telemarketing experience. It was customer service, and I had such a bad reputation in the community service community, or at least that's how I felt. And even at that, I had this intention and goal to, if I were to ever apply for something huger and bigger than myself, how I would go back, how I would come back and say to everybody, I don't fucking care what you think about me. And there was this one day where I was in depression. I was at my parents' house. I was in my room, and this little boy named Manny on what is it called? The new normal? It's called Modern Family. So Modern Family. There's Sofia Vergara, and she has this son named Manny, and Manny is like known to be like this, kind of like myself. He's not like the masculine guy, but he's really intelligent. And his dad is Jay, who's from what is it called? Married with Children. And the dad, and so they pan the camera to a confessional, and right after Manny punks Jay, the dad, he goes, he says you can never go broke stroking a rich man's ego, but he says something like, what did he say? He says something. Manny says something like, he says you never can go broke stroking a rich man's ego. But anyway, Manny said something. Whatever Manny said at that time, I always kind of kept that and remembered that. And so when I was in my room alone, touching myself, taking pictures naked, you can never blackmail a man who has no shame. And so I remember I was in Arizona and I was hooking up with this guy, and he had like red hair and he had like cancer or whatever and stuff. And I was like, oh my god, all of a sudden I was like, so I ordered some McDonald's and stuff. And we're talking, and he just got out of the shower, and I'm like, well, you can never blackmail a man with no shame. And I like look at him, and he's in all this shame, and he's like, and he said it to himself, and he's like, you can never blackmail a man with no shame. And like while he said it, the words had like all this weight in him, and it took him a while. And I think a lot of times, like growing up in like the gay community, or like on the outskirts of like being a masculine machismo man, or being a perfect American man or whatever, a lot of times we feel like what we do and who we are, that someone would use that against us and say, hey, you can never be something who you're not. And then something like a cloud in the sky, like an angel or whatever, comes out above and just says, and starts to ambassador for you, and starts to speak for you and say, hey, they can do whatever the fuck they want to do. And so the beauty of that is that having that truth, that element, or that ingredient to my own recipe, I've never, even if I've come across a maze of life and stuff like that, I've always known that something above me is yearning for me to keep going forward, and like pulling me to say, hey, there's an infinite limit that I need you to go forward. And it's not within me, it's like something within the stars, or something within the universe. And so I always feel like if that's something within myself, I always feel like there's a saying we used to say, the best teachers bring the best out of their students. And so, when you see the city and the community go up and down and falter and dwindle, and you look at around you always wonder if someone's bringing the best out of themselves and out of the community. And really, this community looks so gross. For example, like I use the word metropolitan. I think metropolis. So when I was leaving Arizona, they were like giving all these stats and stuff like that, and saying Arizona is this and that. And it was during COVID and stuff, and Phoenix had lost this metropolis status for being like one of the most beautiful towns in the world. And Phoenix has one of the best transportation systems. It's a little less and less, but their psychology and their standards and their religion are like above par than anybody else, and their services in schools and community are so great. And when you compare it side by side to a town like Santa Ana or any other city like that's in Orange County, none of them compare to Phoenix. But then to lose your metropolis status of this like beautiful city of such and such, not only does it like create like an opportunity for us to be one of the best towns, but you really got to be able to not only see that, but have the elements and ingredients to know how you're going to get your own families there, other than just saying, I'm going in circles round and round 9 to 5 every day. And I mean, it's one of those things where it can make somebody want to leave this town, because that's how insane this community can be. But there's something inside yourself that says, hey, you know, like, there's no mistakes in it. And it's funny because there is a like, if you look at my messages and stuff like that, I talk about my Maslow's hierarchy of needs plan, and then there's a picture of my dad holding my brother, and it's like right at the Colorado Dam, and it's like a perfect pyramid. It's like right where the Colorado River is, and right where Phoenix is, and right where we live. It's like it was meant to be. And so it's like there's, you know, either or wherever I'm at, there's something within me saying that, you know, there's, I don't want to end it up like there's infinite limits, because it sounds so cheesy, but it really has come from a tug within yourself. A lot of times we're being yanked and pulled from something outside of ourselves, and there's nothing wrong with that personally, but I also feel like at the end of the day, when you get to make a decision to start or build a foundation for your own future, and my favorite word is longevity, or my favorite idea is longevity. And the beautiful thing is that, like, for my mom's family, my dad, I'm trying to work on how to get that longevity, because, for example, like, in American history, anytime you mention my mom's last name, they'll be remembered for generations to generations. But my dad's family kind of has like a little skewed scar to it. And so the focus of myself is that we'd think that the other boys in the family would do something to, remember our dad and have that longevity, so that these limits are no longer held upon our next generations and so on, or these infinite limits are always available to us, so that way in the next generation, grandchildren after grandchildren after grandchildren, it's like, you know what, my Uncle Lua, if he was here today, he would say, go fuck yourself, go fuck yourself and get the fuck out of my way. I'm going to go for whatever I want. And I think that really is the biggest thing that I love about infinite limits, is that nobody and nothing can get in your way when you know that someone else has been there. But then it's always better when it's coming from within yourself. So I'll end there. I'm going to talk later about my how and who rescued me in my life, and usually it's just mentors and people who constantly poured in me to just remind me. And one of my favorite things is I was only in one wedding ever, and I never got invited to a wedding after that, but he held me close and he told me, so choose God. And so these infinite limits, at the end of the day, whoever your God is, whatever infinity or limits you have, I just hope that you choose the God that believes in you and gets you and your family and your community wherever you need to go. So I love you guys, and I'll talk to you later, and don't let anybody hold you back. All right, bye-bye.